Hello, welcome to the collections of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, BC. My name is Arlee. I'm a volunteer here at the museum, as is my colleague here, Marilyn, also a volunteer. We both have an abiding interest and also professional experience in the textiles field. When I was working, I was always involved in some aspect of clothing and textiles, be it teaching, retail, research, consulting. So when I quit working, coming to MOA as a volunteer was a natural step for me.
My name is Marilyn, and it's my pleasure to be your co-presenter today. Like Arlee, I studied clothing and textiles in university, and after I retired from working, my interest in world cultures brought me to the Museum of Anthropology, where I discovered the marvelous textile collection. I've been able to share my passion for the collection with visitors to the museum through our public tours, and I'm also able to share my other passion, which is textile sustainability. We're able to share with you some of these beautiful handmade textiles from around the world because the people that made them and owned them lovingly preserved them, passed them on through the generations so that we are able to share them with you today.
This piece of tapa or bark cloth is part of the Frank Burnett collection that was donated to the University of British Columbia in 1927, a full 2 decades before the Museum of Anthropology opened in 1947. The museum now holds 7,500 pieces of textile fiber arts, objects, and this makes it the largest collection in Western Canada. Some of the unique features about the collection are, first of all, it's a worldwide collection. It also holds both historic and contemporary pieces. This piece is part of a broad collection of tapas that have been collected from the various South Sea Pacific Islands areas. These cultures are known for doing this type of work. This particular one is from the Solomon Islands, and it is made from the bark of the banyan tree. Frank Burnett published a book called Through Polynesia and Papua with a Camera. He published this in 1911. And in it, he says that women wear large bustles of tapa or native cloth. They would dye blue if the person be married, brown if the wearer be single, and if the wearer was widowed, the tapa would be of a natural color, which was a yellowish white. In early years, the tapa was used ceremonially, and it was also used for everyday clothing. Nowadays, it's still used in ceremony and in wedding dresses, but it's unlikely that it would be worn for everyday clothing.
A different type of bark cloth was made here in the Pacific Northwest, where the Indigenous people have always held a very deep respect and reverence for the cedar tree. The bark of the tree was peeled off, the rough outer bark was separated from the inner bark, and the inner bark was used to make basketry and clothing. For basketry, the inner bark would be processed into strips, what they then could be plaited or twined. In addition to basketry, it was used for making hats and mats. Another method of production was to pound the smooth inner bark into soft fibres, which then could be woven into clothing such as capes and skirts. Traditionally, this was done from time immemorial, and even today, some Indigenous people practice the art of peeling the bark from the tree. Because of their deep respect for the tree, a prayer of thanks is offered up before the bark is peeled.
We're now in the Textile Research Room, which gives an opportunity for communities to come and have a look at their works that are from their various communities historically or in a contemporary way. It also provides a space for workshops, but when it's not being used for those purposes, it is available to the public to have a look through the drawers and so on. In one of the drawers right now, we're having a look at a textile item that is called a Cat Robe. This is a newer piece, and MOA has always acquired works from living artists who are carrying their cultural traditions forward in new and diverse ways. William White, a Tsimshian artist, was to weave this robe as a commission from the museum. He began it in 2002 as an artist in residence and completed it in 2004. This type of ceremonial weaving has a long history in the northern Indigenous communities of British Columbia. The weavers that were to do this work were high-ranking individuals, and they were specially educated in order to weave ceremonial robes. The robe is made in early years of mountain goat wool, and then when the sheep's wool was available, that was incorporated. In many of the robes, there is also cedar bark, twine, woven into the warp threads, and you can perhaps see some of this in the fringe at the bottom of the robe. As far as the colors are concerned in the robe, they were arrived at through lichen plant and mineral dyes, and then later trade dyes. The robes were worn by high-ranking individuals like chiefs at their special ceremonies, like the potlatch ceremony of the Northwest Coast peoples, and they were very dramatic in their portrayal with these. They were a very special and unique item, and you had to have the rights to wear these. Although it would take about a year or more to weave a Chilkat robe, it was quite often cut by the chief into several pieces after the ceremony and gifted to important guests. This would be about the most significant gift someone could receive at this time. The robe to William White means power. The power of the individuals who have the rights to use it, the power of the weaver weaving the robe, the power that goes into it as it's woven, and the power that comes over the wearer when he wears the robe. William White states that to them it comes alive.
As Arlee mentioned, Chilkat robes were worn by high-ranking chiefs at the important First Nations ceremony called the potlatch. The potlatch is the legal, social, and economic foundation of First Nations culture. And now Arlee and I will take you to the textile storage area to show you some very beautiful textiles from other parts of the world. Welcome to the textile storage area. The Museum of Anthropology has approximately 8,000 textile pieces in the collection, most of which are in storage like this. This area is generally not open to the public, so these are objects which often are not on public display. And the first piece is this lovely Cowichan sweater. This sweater was given to the first director of the Museum of Anthropology, Harry Hawthorne, around 1950. The name Cowichan comes from a First Nation on Vancouver Island who was known for making this style of sweater. And it was also done not only by Cowichan women, but also Coast Salish women. First Nations women in this area practiced the art of wool weaving going back millennia, and they generally made ceremonial robes which were used and worn by high-ranking chiefs. From 1885 to 1951, the Canadian government prohibited ceremonial practices by First Nations people. So this art of wool weaving started to diminish. There wasn't an opportunity to use the beautiful woven wool blankets. Now, prior to the prohibition, the Sisters of St. Anne had arrived in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island and established a school called Sisters of St. Anne School for Indian Girls. And one of the things they taught was the art of knitting. After the prohibition, the Canadian government encouraged First Nations people to produce items for sale so that they could earn income. One of the things that the women were then able to do was to produce knitted sweaters. They were used to working with wool, and they developed this technique of the Cowichan style sweater. These are made from sheep's wool. They're water repellent. They're very appropriate to the climate here on the West Coast. And the colors that you see come from the natural shades of the wool of the sheep. You'll notice that the designs are very, maybe familiar to some of you because they're very reminiscent of the Scottish Fair Isle designs. Now I'm going to turn it over to Arlee to speak a little more about Cowichan sweaters.
The Cowichan sweater became the subject of controversy leading up to the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. The Hudson's Bay Company, commonly known as HBC here in Canada, had manufactured thousands of sweaters that were very similar in appearance to the Cowichan sweater. The First Nations people were concerned about cultural appropriation. When this happens, it means that the individuals are using the knowledge, history, and cultural background for their own profit, which in turn is reducing the profit that the Indigenous peoples would make from their own work. So it's taking their expertise and transferring it to other people. The Hudson's Bay Company said that they would address this. What they did was they ordered a relatively small number of authentic sweaters. In 2011, the Canadian government designated the Cowichan sweater as a national historic event.
The Museum of Anthropology houses one of the world's largest collections of Cantonese opera costumes from before the Second World War. The collection was acquired by former curators Audrey Hawthorne and Elizabeth Johnson, and there are over 800 pieces of costumes, props, and musical instruments in the collection. The Cantonese Opera originated in Guangdong, China, where performances were given as offerings to deities who would then bestow blessings on the community. In the late 19th century, Chinese workers began to migrate to the west coast of North America, and here in British Columbia, they often worked on the railroads or in logging camps. Troupes of Cantonese opera performers soon followed. Because many of the work environments and communities were hostile to these new Chinese arrivals, people found comfort and familiarity in the safe space of the Cantonese opera performance. This particular robe that I would like to show you is from an opera called The Celestial Maiden Presents a Son. This is a double-sided transforming robe, and in the story of the opera, it speaks of a celestial maiden who is one of the daughters of the celestial Jade Emperor who falls in love with a poor mortal scholar. She comes to Earth and marries him, and when her father finds out, he orders her back to heaven. In the meantime, she has become pregnant and pleads with her father to allow her to return to Earth when the child is born. She does. She comes back to Earth to present the son to her husband, and during the performance in that scene, she's wearing a robe like this. One side of the robe, the side that we're not looking at right now, but that I will show you, is the mortal side of the costume. So she first appears with the side displaying birds and flowers. As she's performing, she begins to twirl quickly, and if she's very adept, will then unhook portions of the robe without the audience being aware. She flips the robe over and she reveals herself to her husband as an immortal. And the immortal side of the robe was the first one that we looked at, showing a bat and bird feathers on the sleeves. The skirt that you see is called a phoenix tail skirt, and this fashion was worn by wealthy Ming and Qing dynasty women and by ordinary women at their weddings. In Guangdong, where the Cantonese Opera originated, the celestial maiden from the story and her 6 sisters are also considered to be the patron deities of needlework and weaving.
Retired curator Elizabeth Johnson has pointed out that the decorative work on these very exquisite robes often showed the symbols in large rendering. For instance, when you look at the bat on this robe and you look at the Chinese coins, you can see that they're very large. And the reason for that is that way the audience could see these pieces without the benefit of electric light. Marilyn mentioned the migrant workers traveling to other parts to North America, but they were also traveling to other parts of the world. And as a result, the Cantonese Opera became the first Chinese traditional performance art that was established around the world. Nowadays, the Vancouver Opera describes this complex traditional art form as involving music, singing, acrobatics, martial arts, and dancing. So it really is a very complex skill set. Some of the performers were very skilled at martial arts, and this has become the precursor of the modern Chinese martial art films that we see today. For more information, see the 2019 publication done by MOA called Divine Threads, which is authored by April Liu. Another advantage of MOA's textile collection is that it can be seen by researchers, teachers, artists, and others online at any time at moa.ubc.ca.